Imagine that you are a cat born and raised in the clans of the warrior's world. As an average clan cat, you may have become an apprentice at 6 months of age, trained under a mentor for another inconsistent number of months, and then became a warrior until you died or retired. In this world, who do you think your biggest influence would be? In the society of warriors, there's far less to do in your life, and less choices about directions you can take. You live in the same group, large for groups of animals, but very small relative to our human societies, for the entirety of your existence, and this caste barely alters at all as cats die or are born. You'll have the very occasional cat leave to become a kitty pet or loner or join another group, and another occasional cat or few cats join from one of those groups, but by the time you are a few moons old, you will already be acquainted with the majority of the cats you will ever come to know. In our world, we spend roughly our first 16 to 20 years with our parents or guardians. After that, though, many of our cultures encourage adults to move out or away from their families when they are old enough to take on independence and start new lives with new social groups and, potentially, families of their own. Meanwhile, teachers are adults you see for 4 to 5 days a week for 9 or 10 months of the year. But after that year is over, many of them will stop being significant portions of your life. Some teachers teach multiple grades, so you might see them for a few years, and others are special enough for you to go back and visit when you can, for a few minutes each day, week, month, or year. But all in all, their presences will fade in time. As a result of our cultural system, teachers do have a large impact on specific years of your life, but the family you live with tends to have the largest and most consistent impact on who you will be as an adult. And adults most often keep in contact with their families long after they move out, sometimes even taking them in when their families get old enough to need care as they once did. Warriors is not that world. Your family, unless you are a half-clan cat or a loner or kitty pet who just joined the clans, is probably going to live beside you for most of your life, until they pass on. Additionally, rather than having dozens or more teachers for snippets of your childhood, you are given one personal trainer, a mentor who guides you through your child and teenage years, teaching you not just the skills you need to succeed, but the values and routines that help you become an adult. You may have consistent friends, or you should, realistically, from the age group around you, but you don't always have someone like that to train with, and sometimes it is just you and your mentor. I ask then, taking all of this in, what influence would you expect the parents and mentors and warriors to have on cats' lives? And, of course, the big question, who has more? As I explained, the question of whether parents or mentors have more say in a cat's life is a very different question from asking the equivalent in our world. So let me just add a disclaimer here that I'm not making any judgments in that area. But beings of all sort can't help but be influenced by the adults who guided or misguided their lives. And it is an area with rich potential for both storytelling and character building that I think the series could stand to utilize more often. Also, because I am examining these relationships as they impact cats in their current society, I will regretfully be discounting Dawn of the Clans, an arc from the time before these cultural trends had formed. From what we've been able to see in the series, parental involvement in their kits' lives seems to be more of a voluntary experience, at least after their first 6 months. Several warriors' fathers, for example, barely even look at or talk to their kits, and even though mothers have mostly been granted the eternal role of forced motherhood because of the underlying bias of the creators, even they don't tend to stay consistent presences in their kits' lives once they become apprentices, or especially warriors. Unless it's because they're a poor mother. We'll skip over Firestar, whose parents are never mentioned, but Brambleclaw's mother, Goldenflower, gets only 10 lines across all of the New Prophecy, where her son is a main protagonist. Sandstorm, the mother of 2 protagonists, gets only 77 across all 6 books in the same arc. In Omen of the Stars, Whitewing, who also has 2 protagonist daughters, gets only 82 lines across the arc. The Broken Code was especially bad, with all 3 protagonists' mothers having very little to do. Dovewing got off the best with 126 lines across the arc, but Violetshine got only 57 and Ivypool got only 42, despite all 3 she-cats being previous protagonists and strong characters in their own rights. Even Squirrelflight, a prominent protagonist with 3 protagonist kits, and later another 2 protagonist kits, falls into this trap. across all 12 books of Power of Three and Omen of the Stars, where her kits are the protagonists and she has her own reveals with Ashfur's Fire and Brambleclaw divorcing her, she gets only 412 lines, an average of 34 lines per book, while Firestar, the leader of ThunderClan who isn't especially involved in the plot until the last book, gets 1,168 lines, almost triple her total, with an average of 97 lines per book. In A Vision of Shadows, she is the deputy as well as the mother of Alderheart and Sparkpelt, and yet she gets an even lower total, only 138 lines across all 6 books. In part because she wasn't a quote-unquote bad mother to Alderheart in the way that her previous kids perceived her to be. Meanwhile, Sparkpelt, Berryheart, and Curlfeather, our current protagonists' mothers, have all been stars in the latest arc, but it's because they are all, in different ways, bad mothers, and the protagonists' lives are heavily impacted by the poor relationships they have with them. And even in this case, you might note, 2 of the fathers are dead, Larksong and Jayclaw, and the third, Sunbeam's father Sparrowtail, has been entirely absent. Parents realistically should have a sizable impact on their kids' lives and at least be present through almost all of it, but the series has so far been demonstrating that, unless the parental relationship is a poor one, most cats just treat their family like acquaintances. What of the mentors, then? Surely spending anywhere from 3 to 10 months being trained exclusively by one cat would have a tremendous impact on a cat. Surely it would not only shape who the apprentice turned out to be, but develop a relationship that would continue on for months or years after the apprentice becomes a warrior, either for better or worse. Well, we do start off strong with Bluestar, who took on Firepaw as an apprentice late and didn't get much book time to be his warrior mentor, but still taught him life and leadership skills for many more moons. They had a very strong parental-like relationship that continued and was tested up through her death. Brambleclaw also, he used to have a close and unique bond with his mentor Fireheart, when the warrior learned to see his apprentice as more akin to himself than Tigerstar. Unfortunately, during the time where he was a warrior, as a point-of-view character, the two barely ever spoke with camaraderie, and never as a former mentor and apprentice. He is ThunderClan's leader, and that is about it. Squirrelflight in her first book plays off of Dustpelt plenty, mostly in trying to get away with things under his nose, but after she goes on the journey and, almost immediately after, becomes a warrior, they barely interact, and any relationship between them is never spoken of again. Leafpool is an exception here because she and Cinderpelt did have a lasting and complex relationship, but this is mostly because she is a medicine cat who essentially reports to her forever until she dies. The same can be said of most medicine cat points of view in the series. Where warriors are concerned, Hollyleaf and Brackenfur never had a relationship and barely ever spoke after she became a warrior. Lionblaze, who really should have had a complex and likely destructive relationship with his mentor Ashfur, considering their circumstances, barely speaks to him more than Hollyleaf to Brackenfur, and whatever Ashfur's teachings, attitude, or lack of care did for Lionblaze in the long term is never addressed. Dovewing's apprenticeship under Lionblaze meant she could never get away from the prophecy, but it didn't develop into either a friendship or a strained relationship for either of them. They were tied together by duty, and eventually, when Dovewing left, Lionblaze wasn't even brought up as someone who might care. Ivypool, meanwhile, had Cinderheart, and, like Hollyleaf, they never had a relationship that amounted to much of anything, and never really spoke after Ivypool became a warrior. Alderheart's relationship with Molewhisker was implied to be strained because of Alderheart's anxiety and Molewhisker's frustration with his failings, but much like the rest of Alderheart's arc, it disappeared after the first book when he settled into being a medicine cat. Twigbranch had several mentors, Ivypool, then Sandynose, and finally Sparkpelt, but none of them got the time to develop specific relationships with her past their initial impressions, and none of them are cats Twigbranch still seems to have a relationship with. We also didn't get to see what lasting impact having 3 different mentors with different training styles and opinions of her would have, which would have been nice considering what a unique case Twigbranch was. Violetshine had Dawnpelt and, according to the allegiances of one Super Edition, Rabbitleap, each for only a short time between the kin and changing clans. Rootspring and Dewspring had no relationship, Bristlefrost didn't even notice when her mentor Rosepetal died in front of her, Sunbeam never speaks of or to her mentor Snaketooth, Nightheart has barely spoken to Lilyheart since becoming a warrior, and even the last 2 Medicine Cat apprentices, Shadowsight with Puddleshine and Frostpaw with Mothwing, have had shockingly slim levels of connection. Even as they are constant presences in each other's lives, they barely have any specific feelings about each other at all. So here we come to the true point. Many people throughout this fandom's history have had discussions arguing that the mentors should be or are the most important figure in clan cats' lives, and others have made similar arguments for the families. The reality, though, is that Warriors has a poor track record with including and showing the impact of relationships in general, at least when they aren't romantic endeavors. Both parents and mentors should be key figures in their kids' lives, but this is not something we get to see often. Knowing that, then, I'm going to turn our attention to what should happen. Parents have a greater presence in the clan cats' lives than in our world, but they don't have to act as primary caregivers once kids become apprentices. And even before then, some clans and periods have had cats who did more work taking care of the kits in the nursery so that mothers and fathers could continue some of their warrior duties. Kithood is also when, we have to assume, cats learn about more knowledge-based things like clan history, the warrior code, and clan values, since they all seem to have this knowledge when they begin apprenticeships. But this knowledge could be passed on by parents, other members of the nursery, other warriors, or, especially, elders. It is, in some cases, an explicit part of the elder's role to tell stories to the kits, so even this part of a kit's education might not be the parent's responsibility. In the world of a clan, while your parents are likely going to be there for most of your life, so is every cat in the clan, so you might be raised more communally or gravitate to cats you choose to be close to rather than those related by blood. It would be difficult to completely avoid a cat having a relationship with their parents unless, like Firestar, they came from more abnormal circumstances than traditional clan cats. However, that relationship can vary in intensity and quality, and cats might end up becoming more connected to other queens or den dads in the nursery, or elders and warriors they spoke with instead. There's a variety of possibilities here, which means some cats may be very close to their parents, some may have a poor relationship with them, and others may have a completely neutral and bare-bones relationship with them. Meanwhile, the mentor is not a chosen relationship. The kits have no say in who their mentor will be unless they become a medicine cat, and, most often, the warrior doesn't have a say either. Despite this, they will spend the majority of time over many of the most formative moons of the apprentice's life exclusively in each other's company. The impact of that relationship is not one I could possibly understate if we were speaking about what should happen. Whether a cat forms a lifelong bond with a mentor perfectly suited for them, grows unhealthy coping mechanisms or a distaste for the clans due to a toxic relationship, or feels disconnected from clan life due to a mentor not connecting with them, any relationship they have with their mentor should have a long impact, not just on a cat's skills as a warrior, but on their psyche and impression of the clans and their values. That's why, in universe, it is so important that cats be paired with the right mentor, and so destructive when they aren't. The first arc, with its displays of Greypaw, Ravenpaw, and Firepaw's mentors, and even its mention of mentor relationships like Longtail and Darkstripe influencing their current alliances, definitely put care into this idea. But that has drifted away in time, and there are very few examples in the series of parental relationships having lasting impact or focus. This isn't something the series at large has explored to its fullest, but that isn't a fact that has ever stopped Warriors fans. From headcanoning what certain mentor or familial dynamics could have been like to writing entirely new worlds with casts where you have put care into their relationships, we have the power to take the concepts the series has laid down and expand upon them, and that is likely where the true impact of both parents and mentors in Warriors will always lie. But, it would be really nice if the canonical series could more regularly include and flesh out these relationships, or any relationships aside from the romance ones, really. Thank you for watching, and always remember that when you get older, you cannot escape being a role model. Others will look to you in order to see how to perform tasks, how to know what is right, and how to be a human. Never forget the impact you have on those around you, and use your responsibility wisely.